Okay. Is it live? Hello? Five minutes. Oh, that's bullshit. There we go. Okay. Alright, let's see if my, sorry if it didn't log me out. Okay. Okay. Copy that. Email to everybody. Class time again. Hello, everyone. Class once again. URL is as follows. Hold on. May want to consider marking my channel the end of the semester. Cool. Alright. Okie dokie. Let me get that down there. That's there. Error. Well, buffering it is then. We streaming? We're streaming. Dog is barking. Alright. Is that the train? What the fuck? Alright, yeah. I need to not mess with that right now. Okay. Internet. The internet happens. Alright, we'll do this in a moment. Let some people come in. My stomach hurts. Alright. To get, what is that? That's my Gmail. Expert here, you're not a thing. Ugh. There we go. Alright. Okay. So, social mobility. Oh, I'll just start with this right now. Pardon. The tests are due at the end of the day today, um, rather than like class time because our two classes are at different times. So we're not gonna do that. So like midnight tonight, if you haven't turned it in yet, if you have sent it in via email, I'm pretty sure I got it. Uh, so yeah. Um, I still need to. I still need to get your papers graded first. I've been a little slow on the uptake there. It's been a week. Um, and then I'll start working on getting your test graded. Um, I need to figure out how to. I guess I could just sort of do an overall discussion about the tests. I mean, I've looked at a few. Um, just to kind of give an idea of what I'm looking for the next one. We'll figure it out as we go forward. Um. Okay, so I think that's everything right now. So we're talking about the end of the century, social mobility, higher wages, new job positions, um, expanding middle class, lawyers, doctors, shopkeepers, that sort of thing. And the major force rather, behind this was education. Education was very important in increasing the strength of the middle class. It's weird. Which, of course, depended on what country you were in and what class you were born in anyway, uh, as far as how much education you'd be allowed in the first place. Also, there was some increase in the overall lot for women in this time period. Uh, Many were able to work independently, not having to rely on just marrying into someone who hopefully had some kind of stable job. And then also the suffragettes pushing for the right to vote, which is proper independence really. And of course, as I mentioned to my previous class, I like this image because it's really showing you a. I mean, I hate to use the word snapshot because it's a dumb pun, but I mean, it's literally a look into. Oh, sorry. A classroom of the day. I mean, you can tell some kids weren't paying attention, some kids don't want to be there. Uh, I feel like some of the kids might be beyond. Yeah, I mean, it looks like they're learning blocks, maybe just letters. Some of them might be beyond that level and are bored and want to be doing something else. It's a whole wide range of kids. They're just kids. I mean, this is 100+ years ago at this point, but they're still just kids being kids. And then women in the workplace, and again, this one here is just like, a bunch of women on typewriters. And some of them looked like maybe they weren't ready for the ready for the camera. The ones further down the line are just like, I'm still working on a typewriter. I don't have time for this garbage. Then, of course, the suffragettes going from marching on the street to we'll burn the damn town down if we have to, which is great. They didn't play around. So, moving on to new stuff today. Newspapers were cheaper to print. More of the populace was able to read, so there was this move towards mass culture, which is to say, because it was cost effective to just print a bunch of newspapers, and more people were able to read them, the shift in the newspapers became, how can we sell these to the most people? So this is when the idea of scandal and sensationalist stories became the norm. Many newspapers describing affairs, exotic travels, murder trials. This was around the time of, someone mentioned last time, or maybe not last time, but earlier, the yellow journalism, which was in America for the Spanish-American War. And the reason it was called yellow journalism is the stock newspaper was yellow, and they'd have to bleach it to turn it, white or at least gray before they sent it out, or before they printed it. But because they were trying to, the couple of newspapers that were resorting to just like having the most lurid nonsense possible, were just trying to send out their stuff as quickly as possible. They would just get the yellow paper, print on that, and send it out. So it would cost less to send out, and they could send it out more quickly. So when you went to a newspaper stand and you saw the literal yellow newspapers, you knew that's what that was. So that's what that's about. So that's yellow journalism, by the way. Music was more widely available, no longer restricted to the church or royal court. We had music halls and public houses or pubs, brought in the working class citizens to listen to reproductions of music and songs. The thing about pubs, at least with my time in Ireland, there was even in Ireland, they have the traditional Irish pubs, rather than the more modern ones. And apparently there was a tradition that if you came in and you brought instruments and your buddies and you all played your instruments and you sang and, provided entertainment, they would bring you beer for the night, which I guess was, how they paid for the entertainment. So imagine that worked well in Ireland. Visual arts were more accessible. There were new and affordable museums. although dry plate photography really changed things. Again, photography was relatively new. Dry plate photography made it easier to more immediately develop the film and had the pictures more clear, I suppose. Uh, which again led to paintings and such at the time move away from landscapes and stuff that's like, oh, I want to paint, my backyard exactly as is because I could just take a picture, you know? Um so it became more symbolic, as we're going to see here in a little bit. And motion pictures, begun by brothers Auguste and Louis Lumiere, took hold after 1895. Now, motion pictures, the technology had been a thing for a number of years by this point. It's said that Edison either invented it or stole it, because Edison. But these were mostly the peep shows, as they were called, where you'd have, put this over here, they look like podiums almost, just the square, or just the boxes, and you put your head to to these things that you look down into, and it was sort of a movie. I mean, it was only like a minute or two long, and there was no accompanying sound per se. Like, if there was a gunfight, there wouldn't be gunshot sounds because they couldn't sync the sound and the action. But it would be like, something happening, and they would just be playing music along with it. It was more, for entertainment, or a distraction than anything else. This, though, was more popular, like actual theater stuff. Now, again, these were silent films. These were, it was up on the screen. They'd play music along with it. If there was any dialogue, they'd have to stop what was going on and have like a title card come up and have what they were saying, since subtitles weren't a thing, which makes that level of old, because I like old movies, but that level of old movies difficult to watch. Now, you have mass society. You have the masses, the everybody. But they're also the avant-garde, which literally means those that saw themselves as ahead of the rest in terms of culture, taste, refinement, that sort of thing. And the main philosophical movement at the time was modernism. Maybe I just need more water. Modernism accepted that the deep drives of the subconscious were mysteries. Many things about the world remained unknowable. So, rather than trying to explain everything, rather than trying to put everything into perspective, modernism was just like, yeah, there's stuff we'll never understand, and not just about the world, but about even our own minds and about our own subconscious. So, yeah, that's fine. That's just how things are. And art, we had Art Nouveau, which simply means new art. It's an awful name if, your first language is French. If it's not, it sounds cool. And then we had symbolism, which is just an overall term. Symbolism used symbolic images. Surprise, surprise. Like mythological figures, such as the Sphinx, to represent mysteries of the human mind, because the Sphinx has long represented mystery to people, because we are so far removed from the people who built the Sphinx. It was Napoleon's people who found the Rosetta Stone, which allowed us to kind of translate hieroglyphics, which was, created during the time of Alexander the Great. But even during Alexander the Great's time, the Sphinx was very, very old. So, we still to this day don't really know. And it's believed that because the proportions of the head of the Sphinx and the body are off, it's believed that either it originally had a lion head, or the head of a different ruler, and then a later ruler's like, no, carve my face into it. So they carved it down into that ruler's face, which is why the head is smaller proportionally than the rest of the body. Because the paws are massive compared to, say, the head. It's weird. Literature focused on the impending disaster. Europe was becoming more and more powerful, more and more quickly, but many people at the time felt like it could only result in catastrophe, because these excuse me, these countries aren't directly opposing one another, but they're also in a position to eventually come to blows, and they're all becoming way more powerful than they were the last time there was actually a war in Europe. We had Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. Had the decadent aristocrat temporarily escape to a life of vice, only to meet disaster in the end. I still need to read The Picture of Dorian Gray, but if I remember right, he had a portrait of himself in the attic, and it would age instead of him, and I don't remember what it was that caused his fall. I'm pretty sure it was a whole deal with the devil thing. A Faustian deal, if you will. But I don't remember exactly what the through line was there. This is an image that's in your book, The Isle of the Dead. This is full of symbolism. Again, if I was an art historian or any kind of artist, I could sit here probably the rest of the class and just talk about the symbolism of this piece. Like I said, it's in your book, 675, and it talks about endlessly reproduced symbolist painting, combination of mythological themes, surrealist rendering of Mediterranean scenery, excuse me, invited viewers to contemplate the elemental mystery of death. Sigmund Freud and Vladimir Lenin each had a copy, so like this thing's really popular. I mean, at least I can say, hey, that's Charon crossing the river Styx. You know, right here. That's what that is. I mean, it's about death, so that's clearly Charon and his boat crossing the river Styx. So I get that much, especially if it's supposed to be Mediterranean. Anyway, also some Art Nouveau. It's usually done with these swirls and very organic shapes. The most famous Art Nouveau artist was Alphonse Mucha. A lot of his early works were ads. This is an ad for a cigarette company. As you can see, she's got the cigarette there, and there's lots of smoke flowing up in sort of a lazy curve. But his main focus there is the spirals and whatnot. It's quite interesting, and there's actually a lot of art today even that follows it. I mean, like there's a metro in. Oh, there's metros. There's one in Canada, I think. One in France, I believe. That like just like the metro entrances are like Art Nouveau inspired. Which you'll also get. You'll see pieces like this for all sorts of characters that fan artists do. So if you get this, good for you. If you don't worry about it. My usual thing. Kind of a combination of Muha's, I mean, you can see with the hair there, style, and then also almost a plate glass affair there. Alright. Now, back to the oddest. Now, there were some artists such as Arthur Rimbaud and Paul Gauguin who left Europe to be rid of, quote, everything that is artificial and conventional. Others remain in Europe to try to escape convention by challenging it. We have Pablo Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. This viewed the subjects as though through a pane of broken glass. Excuse me. We'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. He also used African masks as inspiration. Architecture was an interesting shift. Walter Gropius's Foggus Factory was a very utilitarian structure, but it had a lot of open space for windows. And again, it's like, okay, big deal, but this was in the early 1900s, and it was very different. Also, the poetry of the time, W.B. Yeats, was, because he's dead. Again, for those of you, when you do your papers and stuff, past tense. He was Irish, sought to evoke mysterious and mythological, used a lot of Gaelic poems, and even Japanese dramas. And the music, and this, it goes through a lot of examples, but I'm just going to go straight to the Russian ballet, which polarized the crowds in Paris. Let's see. I'll give you the two examples here. When the handsome Russian ballet dancer Alexander Nijinsky danced the piece barefooted with an overtly with overtly sexualized gestures in Paris in 1912. Oh, Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. The performance caused a sensation and a revolution in ballet. The harsh dissonance of Russian composer Ivan Stravinsky's primitivist tone poem Rite of Spring, which is like, you've probably heard Rite of Spring, just, I was going to say, I'll play it for you next time we're in class. This is a weird semester, you guys. Provoked a riot on its premiere in Paris in 1913. Parisians are weird, you guys. I mean, it's it. I don't know. Anyway, here's Picasso's piece. So the proportions are weird and janky and angular because, again, he wants to make it seem as though you're looking through a pane of glass that has been broken. Because these women are, I think the term at the time was performers, and that meant they were sex workers. And in the early 1900s, I mean, it's not that much better now, there were like no real protections for them. So broken is a pretty good way to see them, which is depressing. And there's the Foggus factory, which again, it's like, okay, it's a simple utilitarian building, but you look back here, you've got this building that's like mostly concrete, and it's got these itty bitty little windows, compared to this that's like mostly glass, and just, the supports here, which is, today it's like, well, yeah, that's just like a regular sort of office building. But this is a factory. This is a place where you work and build stuff. And that was unheard of at the time. And again, while we're seeing a lot of lighting come out of it, because this picture was taken as the sun was starting to set, unlike the picture in the book where the sun's out and you can see the sun shining through the glass. While electricity and incandescent light bulbs were a thing at the time, again, they were still relatively rare and relatively expensive, so the more time you could go without using them, the better. Because unlike today, where it's like, you have, you walk into a building and turn on the lights, you would use sunlight for as long as you could. Like back at the Continuum, we would be having class, say, out in that big atrium as much as we could at a time, in an area like this, rather than back in one of the rooms. And there's some, Russian ballet. It was hard to find Russian ballet and not be like modern. It's like, oh, you want some like modern day Russian ballerinas? Like, no. Let's not do that. And then, of course, sciences. Ah, my throat's hurting again. Because the bottom gets so wet. So at Emil Durkheim, working on the increased rates of suicide in the West, which he blamed on anomie, this, what he called industrial alienation, the result of the loss of cultural glues that held society together. So he blamed this on, industrialization and this big change in how people lived and worked together. Gustave Le Bon wrote on the behavior of crowds, loss of individual reasoning to how leaders could direct mobs. That's actually the primary source document at the end of the chapter. Is Gustave Le Bon, The Crowd. So for those of you that have your book, which should be all of you, I hope. He discusses about how when you've got people in a large crowd and they start getting rowdy and riled up, and especially if they start getting especially angry, the reasoning, the individual reasoning of people within that crowd diminishes. So if you have someone in that crowd that's normally reasonable, that normally wouldn't behave, say, perhaps violently, but they're in that crowd and they start getting riled up with the rest of the crowd, they might go along with something they normally wouldn't on their own, because this idea of crowd psychology, essentially, and if someone, and the idea of a mob leader isn't someone who can take a mob and direct them, but instead just gets out in front of a mob and sort of nudges them one direction or another, but can't turn one around once they're moving a certain way. It's quite interesting. Mobs or crowds, even in general, are it's a little bit scary. You get all these people together and suddenly it's like the opposite of a hive mind. Rather than everybody gets together and we're able to think more clearly, it deadens our ability to think rationally. It's odd. Sigmund Freud, we're not going to go too much into him. He's, Sigmund Freud. I mean, you can if you want to. Feel free to if that's what you want to write about. That's, second paper is pretty open. We'll talk about the second paper a little bit later. He considered subconscious fears and desires, yada, yada, yada. Henri Bergson described the brain as not operating according to logic, but was fluid. And, if you ever met another human, you know that people don't act logically all the time. Unless you only know robots. Louis Pasteur developed vaccinations for rabies and anthrax. That's nice. As well as heating milk and wine to prevent bacterial growth, or pasteurization. Who do we know? Oh, Freud? Yeah. He's weird. As far as Pasteur, though, I've literally seen probably 2 videos on last week of people drinking raw milk immediately after coming out of a cow, and it's like, you understand why pasteurization is a thing, right? That's not good for you. Don't do that. So, FYI, if you ever have the chance, don't drink raw milk. There's a reason why we don't do that. Bloody hell. Hey, kitty. What do you want? Did I scare you? I'm sorry. Max Planck, Niels Bohr, Albert Einstein. I mean, again, we could talk about each of them the rest of the class, just going on about the different aspects of physics, relativity theory, really changing what we know about natural sciences and such. And then finally, Friedrich Nietzsche, philosopher that spoke on the will to power, which he believed lay behind all philosophies and religions. Nietzsche, I don't know how much I should speak on Nietzsche, because most of the people who like him tend to not be moral people, I should say. Like, I worked with a guy who loved Nietzsche. Like, he would read Nietzsche all the time. And he was one of those people that you would expect to just walk in one day and start shooting the place up. Like, I have no other way to put that. That's how he was. Nietzsche, establishing a philosophy that ranged beyond good and evil. So a lot of people said he discussed, moral relativity. A lot of his stuff was pretty racist. And then also, one of his works, on the genealogy of morals, romanticized the social Darwinist worldview in which the strong defeat the weak and humanity is better off for it. So, stuff. Yeah, kind of. I mean, a lot of this stuff was happening at this time. I mean, I'm sure Hitler read a lot of Nietzsche, because it was just this idea of individual, life embracing individualism, heroic self fashioning. I mean, I don't know. It's a bit beyond. So there's Freud, and I always lose that guy. There's Max Planck. I love his mustache. I don't know why. There we go. Andre Bergson, that was it. But yeah, so the sciences and the philosophy. I mean, these are still a lot of big names. Freud, love him or hate him, everybody knows about him. Pasteur, Planck, Bohr, Einstein, and I mean, again, Nietzsche was a dick, but everybody knows Nietzsche. Well, most people know Nietzsche, so. Now, as far as the economies, overall, the countries were still doing relatively well. but the competition was still at an all-time high. There were big investments in exchanges made and lost fortunes almost overnight. There were large groups that produced the same product would band together to form cartels to run rival competitors out of business. Because this was just allowed. There wasn't any big trust busting, as Roosevelt would call it later, measures, at least in Europe at the time. What you got, little girl? And of course, we had lots of corruption, capitalist investors paying politicians to push their own agendas. But, it's a good thing that's not something today. Increased farming in the Americas, Southeast Asia, and Africa drove many European farmers out of business. So, more peasants went to the cities to try to make a living, which just meant more crowded cities. Oops. So yeah, the thing about this chapter, just kind of overall, was just things were getting bigger and faster. Just overall, the economy, technology, even society, things were just building and building and speeding up faster and faster. Speaking of, um, if you want to characterize the first industrial revolution by steam and iron, so um, steam engines, things built out of iron. The second industrial revolution was one of gas and steel, so things were powered by gasoline and built of steel. Of course, uh, this didn't just happen everywhere at once. It wasn't just, hey, it's, 1902 or whatever, which that wasn't necessarily the year. Everybody's got gas and steel. In fact, Russia barely had its first industrial revolution by the time the Nazis were invading. So, go Russia. Great Britain, the United States, and Germany were the major producers during this time because they had a skilled workforce and necessary technology to move on to the second stage. Yeah, not gunpowder. That is true. Now, of course, when we think of things built of steel, we think of the big ships, the buildings, the stuff that you can look at today and think, oh yeah, this was the big technology that was built in the early 1900s. However, just like with the first industrial revolution, that wasn't necessarily what drove it economically. What drove the second industrial revolution in terms of its economic output was consumer goods. Like soap and soup. Now, not just soap and soup. That's just it's a good it's just easy to remember. But like if you can mass produce it, and especially if it's a food item that you can just put in a can and seal up, bam, out the door, good to go. Because steel cans, seal them, you don't really have to worry too much about an expiration date. They're easy to ship. shipping canned stuff is so much easier than shipping, fresh stuff. Um, I mean, soap too uh, used to be a pain in the butt to make. Look, soap was originally made out of like animal fat. It's a whole gross thing. But when they were having like industrial soap making and cutting into bars and shipping that out, that was a whole separate thing. And then when you're mass producing it, you can drop the price. Everyone can afford it. Everybody wants it. You're making some serious money. And since you've got the trains to move things long distance, and see, this was the early 1900s, probably some early cars, maybe. I mean, the ship still used steam engines, but more stuff was using gas. Um, we had the rise of the department store, where all the stores came together and had a centralized location so that people could all go to one place rather than having to, go around to, the food store and the clothing store and hardware store and all of that. In fact, there's a whole like sidebar on department stores in the book. The one mentioned here, I'll go into that in a minute. And there was actually a decrease in free trade rather, as the fierce competition between these nation states led to more protective tariffs, because of course it did. Something like that. Well, I mean, I guess a department store, I guess more of a mall. Well, yeah, no, something like yeah, Walmart. I guess that's a department store now, isn't it? So you had the big steel ships, battleships. I don't know if this is the Dreadnought class. I said that in the last class, but now that I'm looking at it, I don't remember if it's technically the Dreadnought class. Blow my nose real quick. Mute. Um, and I mean, obviously that's the British ship there, because in World War One it was battleships. Aircraft carriers didn't come about until World War Two, because World War One barely had aircraft at all. I think they might have had some aircraft carriers, but they were like little flat top boats, and landing on those things was quite dangerous. So, this is the department store as seen in the book. This is the Galeries Lafayette in Paris, which was built in 1893. After Baron Haussmann's rebuilding of Paris, as we mentioned a couple of chapters ago. Now, the best picture I could find was this gaudy Christmas decoration one, with that awful Christmas tree in the middle and those atrocious presents up there around the dome. But yeah, this thing is in Paris, and it's, over 100 years old now. So that's neat. Now, the thing about rising wages is that it doesn't matter if your wages rise, but the cost of living rises. So if yeah, more like malls. I mean, like Macy's is an example. Yeah, is an example used for here in the United States. Yeah. New York City, Macy's added home furnishing, toys, and books to its offerings. Separate departments involved within each store, textiles, yada yada yada. Yeah. Who's your baby girl? Yeah, malls are on here, but in like the really big cities, it would all still be one store, sort of, just different departments. Like, this would all still be. I don't know. But yeah, that idea. Anyway, um, even with rising wages, working class was still very much on the bottom, barely making enough to get by, and working long hours. So, like, you know, let's say I was making $10 an hour at my security job, and suddenly it went up to 15, which is good. I mean, that's a really great increase. That's like 50%. That's a 50% increase. But uh, my rent went up double, and gas went up double, and food prices all over South Carolina went up double. I'm not really making. I'm making 50% more, but everything else costs 200% more. So while my wages have gone up, my real wages, as this is the term if you've ever heard it, have not. Haven't kept up with the change in the cost of living. So that's what it's saying here is even though people were making more money, things were also still becoming more expensive, and they weren't. And the working class, the people on the bottom, weren't able to keep up. So like the middle class was doing fine. The working class, the people that were digging the ditches and stuff, weren't doing well. So the dissatisfaction with this led many to join radical parties like the Socialists or Communists. We'll talk about the difference there in a bit. Others joined trade unions. More often and more successful was the labor strike. There's a thing that I guess I'll do it next year when I do American history. There's a whole labor strike that ends in bloodshed, thanks to Carnegie. 1889, the London dock strike had 10,000 workers rallying in Trafalgar Square. Unlike most strikes, though, this one actually got something done because supporters raised money to keep the workers from starving during the strike. So eventually, there was a minor increase in their wages, which was more than they usually got. So here they are, Trafalgar Square. As I said, Trafalgar Square became the place to go for demonstrations and stuff. I mean, even to this day, I'm pretty sure it's like, hey, Something's going on. Let's go to Trafalgar Square. Oh, I'm sorry, baby. I was fidgeting and I was hitting the spine of my book on my bony heel, and it sounded like somebody was knocking on the door, and it spooked my cat. You're such a weenie. You're such a weenie. Who dares text me? Who's got the balls? Oh, G4S. My other job that I was using as an example, do they know I was talking about them? How dare you talk about us not paying you? Hold on, I've got to bring this up. Okay, this is great. This is wonderful. Alright. How long did they have to strike? Does it say? Um, it doesn't say. 10,000 protesters and 2,000 policemen gathered in a rally at Trafalgar Square in London on Sunday, November 13th. Some strikes, like this one, did turn violent. Stood their ground, defended their rights. It lasted 5 weeks. Supporters of the rally raised money to sustain workers' families during the 5-week strike. Sorry, I was just going to read you guys the text that I got. Message from my security job. Tips for coping with isolation. Talk to loved ones, friends, and coworkers on the phone / FaceTime. On the FaceTime. Play multiplayer games online. Stay mindful. Journal. Ask for help. Meditate. Yeah, alright. Oh, that's good stuff. If they let me have internet at work, I do it at work. That is illegal. Stacy, actually. Well, that's actually illegal. That's called well, the people who come in and replace people like that are called scabs, and that's actually against the law. Apparently, even as far back as that was a law issue. I know you'd think. Yeah, it was a whole thing. I mean, usually they would just they just let them starve themselves out. I mean, a lot of times they would just be like, all right, well, we'll just have other people come in. But usually, since it would be in a relatively isolated community, the people would work together and not undercut each other like that. What do you want? Anyway, what do we got? Okay, so before we finish today, the difference in socialism and communism. Yes, Mr. Otto. What do you want? So Karl Marx and Frederick Engels put together the International Workingmen's Organization in 1864 to unite workers across national borders against their liberal overlords. However, after 2 classes, my throat gets sore. What are you doing? nationalism ended up breaking the back of this movement. So basically, German workers identified more strongly with fellow Germans than other German than say French workers, um, and vice versa. French workers were French workers believed themselves to be more French than you know identifying with, say, the German workers, that sort of thing. Who's your baby girl? And you were not going to get English workers and French workers agreeing to work together over the national issue. So they refounded in 1889 as the Second International Working Men's Organization. They just called themselves Second International. However, by this point, the mindset had changed somewhat. The group split between the orthodox Marxists, who believed overthrowing capitalism was the only way forward, so we needed, proper revolution, and the revisionists, who believed they should work for better wages and conditions within the system. So these two groups became known as the Democratic Socialists, who were the revisionists, and the Communists, who were the Revolutionary Socialists. And then, of course, let's just go even further, and we have the people who are more radical, or the anarchists, who are just like, screw it, let's just get rid of governments entirely. And I want to speak on the Russo-Japanese War at length, so we're going to stop there. And just to mention here again, while this is all using the French Revolution example, while this is on the same side of the room, as it were, it's not. The church was a problem again. Well, I mean, not as bad at this point. It was mostly workers being treated like garbage. And then countries all trying to take more than there was to take, and then the pressure built up and we had a flashpoint. The flashpoint's actually an interesting term. It's the lowest point at which a substance will ignite, and the more pressure you put on the substance, the lower the point it'll ignite. Like a gas, a flammable gas, for example, might ignite at, let's say 150 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you put it in a container and compress it, the more you compress it, the lower the temperature that is required to cause it to ignite, because the pressure is more and more increased. And that actually is true with these political and, as we're going to see, military incidents. Everything that's been going on is building pressure and building pressure. So when we finally do have our spark, which is we're going to see with World War I, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, it causes this huge explosion. that otherwise probably wouldn't have been as big of a deal, but everybody was already so on the edge they were ready to jump into anything. Um, and as soon as it happened, everything just caught fire. Um, but like I said, we'll get into that next time, and probably boop boop. What we got now? You already sent me that, and I laughed at it. I know. Play multiplayer games online. I'm going to. I'll play some Space Station 13. Yeah. Yeah, so right now, the church wasn't too big of an issue for the people. Uh, it was mostly the countries were kind of spiraling into, or rather, to use the technology that they had, they were trains without brakes going down parallel tracks that were gradually coming closer together and they were going for the same place. And they were just constantly putting more and more coal in the engine. It's it's gonna be a mess. I mean, World War One maybe didn't kill as many people as World War Two, and didn't have, say, the kind of atrocities World War Two ends up having, um, or even ends as horribly as World War Two. But as far as destroying Europe, it's incredible. Anyway, before we finish today, I hope everybody sent me their papers because that was due like last Thursday, Thursday before last. I forget. The paper's been due, so hopefully you've already sent me that. If you haven't sent me your test yet, it's due by midnight tonight. So go ahead and get me those answers done. 4 out of the 9, I think, is what I had written on there. It's on Blackboard if you don't know. Hopefully this isn't the first you're hearing about it. Ba, 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 ba. And yeah, I still need to get the papers graded. I will get that in my grade book and then try and get everything put up on Blackboard in the Blackboard grading thing as soon as I can. Including your first test grade, just so that'll all be there since we can't do this in person anymore. And then I'll get your most recent test done as soon as I can. Excuse me. And then we're gonna have to start moving on towards the next test pretty soon here, because after this chapter we'll be doing the Great War, and then after that chapter will be the next test, which I know it feels like we're doing tests back to back, but this most recent test was from a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, yeah, I think that's it. Any last minute questions before we cut for the day? It's fine. It's just somebody's car. You know what cars sound like, Dingleberry? Anyway. Alright, well. I think that'll do it for me. Assuming I don't keel over between now and Thursday, I'll see y'all next time. And stay safe, stay healthy, all that good stuff. Ow. And I'll see y'all later on. Sure. Okay, yeah. Take care. Bye.